No nanny survived a day with the billionaire CEO's triplets until a single mom made them laugh. Before we dive in, I want to know, where in the world are you watching from right now? Type your city in the comments so we can see just how far this story reaches. And when we get to the end, I dare you to rate it from 0 to 10, because this one might just break your heart. Now, enjoy the story. No nanny ever lasted more than a single day inside the billionaire mansion of CEO John Prescott, because every time one stepped into that marble kitchen, what greeted them wasn't the sweet laughter of children, but flying pans, spilled juice, and 3 voices crying out in anguish. We don't want another nanny. We want our mom. 21 had already quit. None of them ever came back, until one bitter winter morning when the heavy front doors echoed with a knock, and a stranger walked in hand with her little girl right into the heart of the storm. Was this the beginning of yet another tragedy? Or the moment when the Prescotts would finally find the warmth of family again? The stranger walked into the storm. Down the gravel drive leading to the Prescott estate, the winter wind whipped through the trees, sending dry leaves spinning in cold, restless swirls. Inside, the sound of shattering dishes, the cries of children, and the heavy silence of a house once filled with love, now broken into a battlefield. John Prescott, 36 years old, billionaire CEO of Prescott Holdings, a man who could sign a $1 billion contract with nothing more than a nod, stood powerless within the walls of his own home. His wife was gone. His 6-year-old triplets were in open rebellion, and 21 nannies had already fallen to the chaos. Then came the knock. Thud, thud, thud. At the door stood an ordinary woman, Linda Carter, 28, her blonde hair tied neatly in a braid, her hand resting gently on her 5-year-old daughter's shoulder. No degrees, no social standing, no glittering promises, only a pair of steady blue eyes and a quiet voice that said, "I came for the job." John almost sent her away until a piercing scream ripped through the kitchen, followed by smoke curling into the hallway. Linda didn't wait for permission. She set her suitcase down, bent to whisper to her little girl, "Lily, wait for me here." Then she stepped inside, as if a single breeze dared to walk headfirst into a storm. And now the question is for you. If you were Linda, would you dare walk into that kitchen, the very place where 21 others had fled? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because this was the moment that changed everything for the Prescotts. Part 1. The Chaotic Kitchen. Clang. The crash rang sharp as cast iron slammed against the marble wall, leaving a scorched black streak across the pristine white paint. Half-cooked pancakes splattered across the counter, syrup dripping down leather chairs. Orange juice bled across the granite floor, pooling beneath the cold glare of the crystal chandelier. Tommy, the eldest of the Prescott triplets, stood red-faced fury blazing in the blue eyes he had inherited from his mother. At just 6 years old, his voice already tore raw as he screamed, "We don't want another nanny. We want our mom." Danny and Bobby joined in like a desperate choir. Danny hurled a jar of candy skyward, sweet fragments shattering like rain beneath his shoes. Bobby shoved his chair back, palms slapping the table in sharp, defiant thuds. The newest nanny clutched her wooden spoon, trembling eyes wide with panic. She ducked just as a carton of milk flew past, splattering white across her dress. Fear swallowed her whole. "I'm not paid enough for this," she shrieked. Apron flying, she snatched her bag and bolted, heels clattering frantically against the marble. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind her. Once more, the 40-room mansion had devoured another soul, its 21st nanny gone. Silence fell for just a breath. Only the ragged sound of 3 small chests heaving, their eyes burning with a fire too fierce for children. They didn't cry. They just stood there screaming at the emptiness, the shape of the mother who would never return. The oven's smoke alarm began its shrill beeping as the forgotten bread inside blackened to ash. Thin coils of smoke curled upward, staining the air with bitterness. Footsteps thundered down the hall, measured heavy. Then the tall frame of John Prescott filled the doorway. His white dress shirt was wrinkled from another endless day in boardrooms, tie hanging loose around his neck. In his hand, a fire extinguisher habit, after too many nights spent putting out flames, literal and otherwise. What now? John barked, scanning the wreckage as if tallying losses from a failed deal. Before him, 3 boys standing in ruins of shattered dishes and sticky syrup. Red jam smeared the walls like blood. Tommy glared. Danny looked down. Bobby crouched on his chair, eyes lit with raw defiance. John's jaw tightened, knuckles whitening around the extinguisher. He was a man who could bend Wall Street with a signature. But here in his own home, he was powerless against 3 fragile storms. Who opened the oven, he demanded. No answer. Only silence broken by the hiss of smoke. And then, Sarah. For a fleeting instant, John saw his late wife in memory's cruel mirror. Her laughter had once filled this kitchen. Now only a phantom sob echoed in his chest. His heart clenched, but his mouth remained locked, surrendering only a weary exhale. Tommy drew in a ragged breath, gathering every ounce of rage his tiny body could hold, then shouted until his voice cracked. "We don't need you yelling at us. We need Mom." The cry sliced through the marble halls. Danny and Bobby roared back in unison like soldiers on the same front. "We want her back. No more nannies." It wasn't just rebellion. It was a wound, raw and bleeding, turned into sound. Tommy hurled a jar of jam to the floor glass, exploding like gunfire. Danny raised a spoon as if it were a weapon. Bobby scrawled on the white walls with a crayon crooked letters, spelling one word over and over: Mom. John froze. His chest felt bound in a vice, as if unseen hands squeezed his heart until it barely beat. He longed to scream back that he missed her too, that he would give anything to have Sarah alive again. But his voice betrayed him, weighted with grief. Death had stolen his wife, and with her the last piece of him that knew how to be a father. To these boys, this chaos wasn't mischief. It was a cry for rescue. Yet John, razor-sharp in boardrooms, stood helpless here, a stranger in his own family. The smoke thickened. The kitchen, gleaming with marble and glass, now looked more like a frozen castle, grand, cold, and fractured to its core. The smoke alarm finally fell silent after John smothered the flames in the oven. What lingered was the stench of charred bread clinging to the air, tangled with the sticky sweetness of syrup, and the red smears of jam streaking the walls like wounds that refused to heal. The vast kitchen now looked less like a home and more like an abandoned battlefield. Chairs toppled across the marble floor, cabinet doors still rattled from the last slam. John sank heavily onto a tall chair by the bar. The same broad shoulders that commanded boardrooms now hung low, burdened by a war he could never seem to win. Across from him, the triplets had gone quiet. They no longer screamed. They only stared at one another, eyes swollen, defiant, tiny warriors who refused to surrender. Tommy crossed his arms, his voice breaking even as he tried to sound strong. "She's not coming back, is she?" The words cut through the silence, half truth, half blade. Danny stayed mute, fists clutching the edge of his shirt, while Bobby turned away, tears carving a path down his cheeks, mixing with the sticky syrup on his chin. John wanted to gather them close, to pull all 3 into his arms, but his legs felt like stone. What once was intimacy had turned into a gulf too wide to cross. His mouth opened, but all that escaped was a breath, a sigh that carried more defeat than words ever could. The kitchen drowned in suffocating silence. Outside, the winter wind lashed against the glass, a cold reminder that inside this billion-dollar mansion, love and warmth had been buried with a heart that no longer beat. And then 3 knocks. Thud, thud, thud. The sound wasn't loud, but in the hollow quiet of the house it echoed like an unfamiliar heartbeat, steady and unyielding. Tommy's eyes narrowed, his voice raw and sharp. "Tell them to leave." Danny shook his head and clutched Bobby tighter, as if afraid anyone who entered would only abandon them too. 3 sets of eyes turned toward the hallway where the knocks came again, patient, calm. John rose slowly, each step dragging as if weighted with lead. His pulse quickened, inexplicably heavy, when his hand closed around the gleaming brass handle. He pulled the door open and froze. Before him stood a woman with her blonde hair tied neatly in a braid, her green eyes steady, unshaken. In her hand, a worn leather suitcase. At her side, a little girl clutched a stuffed fox, wide-eyed at the doorway into this world of marble and chandeliers. The woman offered a small smile, her voice soft but certain. "Hello, I'm Linda Carter. I came about the nanny job." For a moment, John could only stare. Behind him in the smoky kitchen, 3 little boys held their breath. None of them expected it that on the most chaotic day of all, someone would dare to knock and step straight into the storm called Prescott. And now I'll ask you, if you were Linda, would you have the courage to walk into this mansion of tempests where 21 others had already fled? Share your thoughts in the comments. Part 2. The stranger mother appears. John hadn't even spoken when Linda set her suitcase down on the marble step. She bent to her daughter and whispered, "Lily, wait here." The little girl nodded, clutching her stuffed fox tight wide eyes, following her mother with quiet trust. Without waiting for permission, Linda stepped across the threshold, her worn shoes leaving faint smudges of mud on the gleaming stone floor. John frowned. No one, not a partner, not an employee certainly, not a stranger had ever walked into his mansion uninvited. Yet something in her steady stride kept him from stopping her. The noise still carried from the kitchen, clattering spoons, stomping feet, muffled sobs. Linda paused at the doorway, taking it in. 3 children's syrup smeared across their cheeks, glass crunching underfoot, eyes red but burning with defiance. The wreckage of shattered glass glistened like fragments of broken hearts scattered across the tile. Tommy locked his gaze on her, his voice breaking sharp with mockery and rage. "You're the new nanny, aren't you? You won't last till lunch." Linda didn't answer right away. She tilted her head, letting the silence settle. Then she smiled, not mocking, not afraid, just calm. Her green eyes held a stillness so unusual it seemed to draw the storm toward her. The air shifted. Even John, watching from behind, felt the tension bend. Who was this woman, and why wasn't she trembling like the others? Tommy stepped closer, defiance sparking. "You think you're different. They all said they could handle us. None of them stayed. You'll leave too." Danny hurled another spoon to the floor, the metallic clang biting the air. Bobby crossed his arms, his young face wary, his voice low. "Don't even try. We don't need you." The silence thickened, pulsing with the thud of John's heart. His grip tightened around the fire extinguisher, bracing for the familiar moment, the panic, the shouting, the flight. But Linda didn't move. Instead, she walked into the chaos, lowered herself to her knees so her eyes met theirs. Her voice was soft, but it carried like a thread of warmth through the wall of fury. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I won't last. But I didn't come here for the money. I came because I know what it feels like to lose someone you love." The room stilled. Danny's trembling hands froze. Bobby tilted his head, confusion breaking through suspicion. And Tommy, the leader of their rebellions, hesitated. He searched her face as if to see whether the pain in her words was real, or just another adult's lie. Behind them, John felt something grip his chest. No one had ever dared to say that to his sons. No one had touched the raw wound the family carried. For a moment, the boys' armor cracked. Their defiance thinned into something fragile, something uncertain. Tommy drew a sharp breath, trying to mask the flicker of weakness. He lifted the sticky jar of jam in his hand and thrust it toward Linda. "If you're really not scared, clean this. Prove it." Danny sneered, his voice slicing. "Yeah, let's see how long you last." Bobby bit his lip, torn between hope and dread. This was the ritual grown-ups always broke, always ran. John started forward, ready to stop it, but Linda raised a hand quietly, asking him to let her be. She stepped to the mess of jam red and sticky against the pale tile. The sweetness reeked sharp, clinging like a wound that refused to close. She crouched, gathering shards of glass in her palm. A thin line of blood welled when one cut her finger. She only winced, never pulling away. Instead, she smiled gently, her voice light as air. "You boys know how to make a real storm. That takes teamwork." Tommy faltered. Danny shot Bobby a glance, surprised. No one had ever praised their chaos. No one had ever dared call it teamwork. Linda Rose fetched a cloth and began wiping jam from the floor. She moved slowly, patiently, as though it were the most ordinary thing in the world. Her hands were steady, her humming soft a tune without words. The sound drifted through the cold kitchen, softening its edges. Bobby let out a small, startled giggle, clapping a hand over his mouth. Danny's frown wavered, and Tommy, though he scowled, felt the corners of his lips twitch, almost betraying the ghost of a smile. From the doorway, John watched, stunned. For 6 long months, the only silence in this kitchen had been born of rage. Now, for the first time, it came from something else, something fragile, unexpected, and almost peaceful. Linda's soft humming carried on steady as she scrubbed the mess, her shoulders swaying just slightly as though she were dancing with the work. Bobby was the first to break the silence, a small giggle slipping out like a spark in the dark. The sound spread through the kitchen like a fragile flame. Danny tried to keep his face stern, but the corners of his mouth trembled. Tommy, the strongest, the leader of every rebellion, refused to surrender so easily. His lip pressed so tight it broke the skin, his eyes blazing as if he could cling to anger forever. But then Linda lifted her head. Her calm green eyes met his without flinching, without fear. "I don't know how to clean this perfectly," she said, raising the stained cloth, "but I do know how to try, even when the mess isn't mine." The words pierced through the armor Tommy had built. His fists clenched hard, then loosened. A single tear slid down his cheek, mixing with the sticky syrup already smeared there. Danny froze. Bobby blinked rapidly, then edged closer. He tugged gently at Linda's sleeve, whispering, "Does it hurt?" Linda smiled softly, holding up her cut finger so the boy could see. "A little. But pain means you're still alive. And if you're alive, you can still heal." From the doorway, John's heart twisted. He hadn't seen his sons cry since the day Sarah was buried. Their grief had only ever roared through anger. And now, a stranger with nothing but a steady gaze and simple words had cracked the silence wide open. For the first time in months, the kitchen wasn't a battlefield. It was a room learning how to breathe again. After Tommy's tear fell, the house quieted into a different kind of silence. No shattered glass, no screams, only the sound of 3 small hearts daring to admit their pain. Linda lowered herself to sit on the floorcloth, still in hand. Bobby slid beside her, hesitated, then let his head fall gently against her arm. Danny lingered for a moment before dragging a chair close, sitting down as though afraid to miss the fragile circle forming. Only Tommy stood apart, fists tight, storms swirling in his gaze. John watched, his chest heavy. 6 months he had hired the best therapists, the highest paid nannies. All of them had walked away. And yet here this woman, with nothing but an old suitcase and unwavering eyes, had managed in a single morning to do what no one else could: keep his children still. Finally, Tommy's voice cracked low and trembling. "Why don't you just leave?" Like everyone else, Linda looked up at him, her eyes shining with rare honesty. "Because leaving has never healed anyone. Sometimes, the bravest thing is to stay." A cold winter draft slipped through the window, carrying with it the last trace of smoke. But in that moment, the kitchen seemed warmer, as if a new fire had been kindled where ashes once lay. And now I'll ask you, if you were Linda, would you be brave enough to stay in a house full of broken hearts instead of walking away like all the others? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Part 3. The words that stilled the house. The kitchen was boiling again, like a pot set to high flame. Tommy dragged a stool in front of him like a fortress wall. Danny gripped the pepper jar as if it were a secret weapon. Bobby had already climbed onto the lowest drawer, ready to launch into a new attack. Above them, the crystal chandelier threw its harsh light onto the marble floor, illuminating dark red streaks of syrup that looked more like wounds carved into the house itself. John stood tall in the doorway, instinct rising in his throat, ready to roar. But Linda moved first. Her worn shoes scraped softly across the stone. Her hands still bore thin traces of blood from the broken glass. She wore no apron, no armor, just a slender woman in the center of a storm of boys. "Don't come closer," Tommy growled, eyes blazing like hot coals. If you can't handle us, just go. Linda stopped just a step away, lowering herself to meet his gaze. Danny's knuckles whitened around the jar. Bobby held his breath, waiting for the familiar moment, the retreat, the fear, the running. But Linda didn't step back. "You can yell," she said quietly, her voice as soft as velvet sliding across marble. "You can try to chase me out just like everyone else." She drew a breath, her eyes locking on Tommy's fury without flinching. "But before you throw anything else, hear just one thing." The refrigerator hummed low. The winter wind whispered through the glass panes. And then Linda pressed her jam-stained hand against her chest, her words falling like a prayer. "I know what it is to lose someone." The pepper jar slipped from Danny's fingers and hit the counter with a dull clack. Bobby blinked rapidly, startled as though a sudden light had blinded him. Tommy opened his mouth, but no words came. At the doorway, John's breath caught. It was as if someone had pried open a door in his chest he'd long sealed shut. The storm stilled, hushed by a single sentence, heavy and soft as rain. The kitchen moments ago, a battlefield, now held a silence so deep it pressed against the walls. Even the hum of the fridge seemed to fade into the distance. Danny blinked fast, the boy who always played tough, now trembling at the edges. Bobby's small shoulders slumped as though he'd just heard a language his heart had known all along. And Tommy, the strongest, the fiercest, fought the longest. His eyes bored into Linda's, searching for a crack, a lie, a trick. But her gaze held steady, clear but deep, like someone who had sunk into darkness and fought her way back up. His voice broke, strangled in his throat. You lost someone too." Linda nodded gently. Her cut hand hung at her side, the dried streak of blood still visible. Her voice was soft enough to sound like prayer. "Yes, someone I loved more than myself." John's heart wrenched. How long had it been since he'd admitted to himself out loud that he missed Sarah? 6 months of burying grief under contracts, meetings, numbers. Yet this stranger had unearthed it with a single sentence. Danny swallowed hard. Bobby leaned forward, eyes locked on Linda as if she held an answer. And in that moment, the chaos gave way to something fragile, something neither fury nor despair, something that looked faintly like hope. Linda pulled a low chair closer, then changed her mind. Instead, she sat down right there on the cold marble floor in the middle of syrup stains that spread like veins across a heart, stretched too thin. "If you want," she said softly, "you can sit with me." Danny looked at Tommy, uncertain, then slowly dragged a chair closer. Bobby edged back half a step, as if afraid any sudden movement might shatter the fragile thing that had just begun to form. From the doorway, John's phone buzzed in his shirt pocket, short, sharp, the priority tone from his office board, "Needs you." He glanced at the screen, fingers tightening until his knuckles whitened, then shut it off. In his world, $1 billion deal could wait. But this moment could not. Linda laced her fingers together, her voice steady but slow. "When I was 17, I sat in a waiting room that smelled of antiseptic. My shoes were soaked through from the rain. The person who had promised to stay was gone as if they'd never existed. I counted every coin in my pocket, just enough for a bus ride home." She paused, staring down at the thin cut drying on her finger. "I stood in front of a door. If I walked through it, maybe the crying would stop forever. But then, a nurse placed a stethoscope in my hands. I heard a heartbeat, tiny, fragile, alive." Linda pressed her palm to her chest, closing her eyes. "That was the day I learned. Sometimes you don't run even when you're terrified. Sometimes you stay." From the hall, a small shadow peeked in. Lily had crept past the doorway, clutching her worn, stuffed fox. She looked at the triplets for a long moment, then walked straight to Tommy. Holding the fox out with both hands, she whispered, "When I get scared, I hold him." "Maybe." "You can try." Tommy froze as if someone had struck a hidden chord inside him. The fire in his eyes faltered, replaced by something raw, something wet. He didn't take it right away. He just brushed his fingers along the fox's ears, testing if it was real. Linda opened her palm, revealing a frayed bracelet, nothing more than a faded pink thread tied in a small knot. My mother tied this on me when I was little. I've kept it ever since. Small things like this remind us we're not invisible. Under the chandelier's glow, the worn thread shimmered faintly. John swallowed hard. Another image rose over the memory before him, Sarah tying ribbons on his birthday cake, teasing him that precious things don't need to be expensive, only true. His chest ached not with regret, but with something he hadn't allowed himself in months the permission to remember. Bobby's eyes grew wide, fixed on the bracelet. Danny inhaled sharply as though holding back a tide. And Tommy? He leaned in, placed the stuffed fox beside the thread in Linda's hand, and whispered so soft it almost broke apart. If you really know what pain is, do you know how to stop it? Linda smiled, weary yet warm. No one can stop sorrow, Tommy, but you can sit with it. And when someone sits with you, it isn't as cold. She placed the pink thread gently into his palm. Keep it for me just for a while. Tommy's fingers closed tight, clutching it like a secret. In that moment, the wind outside seemed to soften, and for the first time in months, the grand, glittering kitchen felt less like a fortress and more like a home. Linda pulled a low chair closer, then changed her mind. Instead, she sat down right there on the cold marble floor in the middle of syrup stains that spread like veins across a heart stretched too thin. If you want, she said softly, you can sit with me. Danny looked at Tommy uncertain, then slowly dragged a chair closer. Bobby edged back half a step as if afraid any sudden movement might shatter the fragile thing that had just begun to form. From the doorway, John's phone buzzed in his shirt pocket, short, sharp, the priority tone from his office. Board needs you. He glanced at the screen, fingers tightening until his knuckles whitened, then shut it off. In his world, a billion-dollar deal could wait. But this moment could not. Linda laced her fingers together, her voice steady but slow. When I was 17, I sat in a waiting room that smelled of antiseptic. My shoes were soaked through from the rain. The person who had promised to stay was gone as if they'd never existed. I counted every coin in my pocket, just enough for a bus ride home. She paused, staring down at the thin cut drying on her finger. I stood in front of a door. If I walked through it, maybe the crying would stop forever. But then, a nurse placed a stethoscope in my hands. I heard a heartbeat, tiny, fragile, alive. Linda pressed her palm to her chest, closing her eyes. That was the day I learned. Sometimes you don't run, even when you're terrified. Sometimes you stay. From the hall, a small shadow peeked in. Lily had crept past the doorway, clutching her worn stuffed fox. She looked at the triplets for a long moment, then walked straight to Tommy. Holding the fox out with both hands, she whispered, "When I get scared, I hold him. Maybe you can try." Tommy froze as if someone had struck a hidden chord inside him. The fire in his eyes faltered, replaced by something raw, something wet. He didn't take it right away. He just brushed his fingers along the fox's ears, testing if it was real. Linda opened her palm, revealing a frayed bracelet, nothing more than a faded pink thread tied in a small knot. My mother tied this on me when I was little. I've kept it ever since. Small things like this remind us we're not invisible. Under the chandelier's glow, the worn thread shimmered faintly. John swallowed hard. Another image rose over the memory before him. Sarah tying ribbons on his birthday cake, teasing him that precious things don't need to be expensive, only true. His chest ached, not with regret, but with something he hadn't allowed himself in months the permission to remember. Bobby's eyes grew wide, fixed on the bracelet. Danny inhaled sharply as though holding back a tide. And Tommy? He leaned in, placed the stuffed fox beside the thread in Linda's hand, and whispered so soft it almost broke apart. If you really know what pain is, do you know how to stop it? Linda smiled, weary yet warm. No one can stop sorrow, Tommy, but you can sit with it. And when someone sits with you, it isn't as cold. She placed the pink thread gently into his palm. "Keep it for me, just for a while." Tommy's fingers closed tight, clutching it like a secret. In that moment, the wind outside seemed to soften, and for the first time in months, the grand, glittering kitchen felt less like a fortress and more like a home. Part 4. The First Smile. The kitchen still reeked of syrup, its sweetness clinging sharp in the air. Red stains streaked the marble like wounds that hadn't yet healed. Flour dusted the floor, and white mingled with shards of glass, glittering like broken snow. The air was still taut, stretched thin, yet the racing heartbeats of 3 little boys had slowed, softened by Linda's quiet confession. Linda rose, brushing her messy hands against her skirt. Without a word, she reached for a broom in the corner. She set it upright on the floor, leaned her chin against the handle, and let her eyes sparkle with mischief. Tommy narrowed his eyes, suspicious. "What are you doing now?" Linda cleared her throat dramatically, then burst into a silly sing-song off-key and childlike sweep, sweep, sweep the jam, send the monsters back to camp. She tilted her head as if conducting an invisible orchestra. Her voice was nothing special, flat even off pitch, but it was so ridiculous that the heaviness in the room shifted just a fraction. Danny blurted out, "That's terrible." Instead of stopping, Linda sang louder, spinning clumsily the broom handle, suddenly her imaginary guitar. The hem of her shirt brushed the floor, leaving a faint, clean streak through the chaos. Bobby giggled, quick and sharp, clapping a hand over his mouth. Tommy shot him a glare, but it lacked its old fire. Catching it, Linda exaggerated a slip on the flour, flailing like a circus clown, before plopping onto a chair with a loud whoops. This time, the laughter came real. Tentative, trembling, but laughter nonetheless. The first to echo in the Prescott mansion in months. Linda grinned, tapping the broom handle against the marble like a microphone. "Cleanup crew on deck," she called, putting on a mock, serious face. "Captain Tommy, take the center line. Danny, you're in charge of spin attacks, flower zone. Bobby's on drums. Keep the beat for the team." Bobby snatched a pot lid, pounding out a wild ting-tong-tang rhythm. Danny grabbed a mop, spinning it clumsily like a dancer before nearly toppling over, sending everyone into giggles. Linda threw a dish towel over her shoulder like a superhero cape, strutting across the marble, still singing nonsense. "Left, right, swish it clean. Make the floor a movie scene." Her hands deftly swept shards into a safe corner, her voice playful all the while. Bobby bounced in rhythm, shouting 1, 2, 3. Danny dragged a chair upright, mopping in arcs that looked more like rainbows than clean lines. And Tommy, he stood still, spoon clenched, torn between pride and surrender. For a beat he lingered. Then, clink, clink, clink. He tapped the wooden spoon 3 times against the counter, a signal. Linda turned with a thumbs up. "Captain's ready." The laughter spread faster than the smell of syrup. Bobby hopped to Linda's side, Danny charged through the flower zone, and Tommy, though his scowl remained, couldn't hide the twitch of his mouth. Linda leaned close, her voice warm as she dabbed a red streak from his cheek with the towel. "Your squad did good work today." She stuck a little star-shaped sticker on his shirt. "A badge of honor." Tommy let out a short, startled laugh before he could catch it. The sound made his eyes soften and then widen with hesitation. "Am I even allowed to laugh, Mom?" Linda tilted her head, smile glowing like a small flame. "You can remember your mom and still laugh. One doesn't cancel the other." At the doorway, John stood frozen. His phone still buzzed in his hand, the board, waiting. But he lowered it slowly. For the first time in months, the house rang with something richer than silence or screams. Children's laughter, a sound that felt like breath returning to the walls. The kitchen, once silent and hollow, now echoed with a strange symphony. The clanging of Bobby's pot lid, the swish of Danny's mop, and Linda's hopelessly off-key singing. Her voice had no melody, no rhythm, rising too high, then tumbling down like a runaway roller coaster. Yet it was that very clumsiness that made the children laugh until their sides ached. Jam on the ceiling, jam on the floor, sing with me louder or I'll sing more. Danny cried out, "No, don't sing more!" But his protest broke into laughter. Bobby rolled onto the floor, clutching his stomach in giggles. Tommy beat his spoon against the table, calling out, "Faster, faster." Linda spun like a dizzy dancer, scrubbing and singing so quickly that the words melted into nonsense. Her golden braid unraveled, loose strands sticking to her cheeks. But she didn't care. She moved with exaggerated silliness like a clown who'd gladly make a fool of herself just to keep her little audience laughing. Tommy tried to hold on to his leader's stern composure, but he too collapsed back in his chair, a smile cracking open, the first real smile after months of nothing but frowns. His eyes glittered as he studied Linda, puzzled, almost suspicious. Why hasn't she run away? How can she turn this chaos into joy? At the doorway, John leaned against the wooden frame chest tight. That sound laughter, the kind he thought he'd never hear again in this house, rose like sunlight filling the marble kitchen. His throat burned not from smoke, but from something breaking inside him, the cold armor of a powerful CEO who was utterly powerless in his own home. In the middle of chaos, the kitchen had come alive, and the laughter, awkward, fleeting, was the first fragile light after a long stretch of darkness. The sharp scent of lemon cleaner mixed with the sticky sweetness of syrup changing the air. Linda tore a sheet of paper towel, folded it into a silly crown, and placed it on Bobby's head. The maestro of cleanup crew, she declared, handing him a steel ladle. Bobby squeaked with laughter, banging it against the sink. Danny, inspired, snatched a roll of foil and crumpled it into a crooked badge. Linda pinned it on his shirt. "Captain Rainbow," she announced. Danny grinned proudly, wiping jam into a shimmering red arc across the tiles. Tommy, the field commander, hesitated by the island counter. Linda set a plain plate before him, dipped her finger into water, and traced an invisible circle. "The eye of the storm," she whispered. "Anyone who passes through here will be safe." Tommy hesitated, then finally swept a long line across the floor, pushing shattered glass into a neat pile. The beat of spoons and ladles quickened. Linda slowed her voice, lowering it into a gentle chant, steadying the rhythm of the room. "Step, wipe, breathe, and stay. Let the storm just pass today." Bobby laughed until he hiccuped. Danny mopped while skipping like a child. Tommy let slip a brief chuckle, then quickly covered his mouth, fear flashing in his eyes. He turned away, voice rough. "If I laugh, does it mean she'll go away even faster?" Linda froze. She didn't rush to hug him, didn't drown him in comfort. She simply turned halfway, letting her words cross the short distance between them. "No, Tommy. A smile doesn't erase anyone from this world. It just gives sorrow a chance to sit down and rest." Through the window pane, a streak of sunlight broke free, spilling gold across the white stone floor. Tommy inhaled, dropped his hand, and let his lips curve again, tiny, hesitant, but real. A nightlight flickering back on in the dark. John loosened his tie, rolled up his sleeves. Without a word, he bent down, picked up the last shard of glass, and set it in the trash bin. His gaze met Linda's. No contracts needed signing. This was an agreement sealed in laughter, fragile yet binding. When the wall clock chimed 8, the Prescott kitchen was no longer a battlefield. The jam stains had turned into crooked rainbows across the tiles. The shards of glass gathered neatly glittered like clumsy stars under the chandelier. And most of all, the three boys were laughing. Not the bitter laughter of defiance, not the ragged shouts of anger, but true laughter, bright, unguarded, almost sheepish for being caught so vulnerable. Bobby collapsed on the floor, holding his stomach. Danny laughed so hard his tears streaked his cheeks. And Tommy, proud, wary. Tommy let out a shaky laugh that grew louder, spilling into the room until his brothers howled again. Linda leaned against the broom, sweat glistening on her forehead, but her green eyes shone with a quiet triumph. She didn't need to win. She didn't need to prove herself. All she needed was this three small hearts softening, if only for a moment. That was her first victory. John stood frozen at the doorway, throat tight, undone by the sound he thought was gone forever, his son's laughter. It echoed through him, tender, cracking the icy wall that had sealed this house for half a year. He turned away, hand brushing his eyes, pretending only to straighten his nose. But inside his chest trembled this titan of Wall Street, felled by three innocent bursts of joy. Linda lowered herself into their circle on the floor. Her voice softened to a near whisper. "Laugh, boys. Laugh so your mother can hear you from heaven." Three pairs of eyes lifted silent for a beat, then nodded, and together, their laughter rose again, louder, brighter, a fragile hymn of healing. Do you remember the last time a smile broke the darkness in your life? Share it in the comments. Who knows, your story might just become someone else's light tonight. Part 5. The Past Revealed. The kitchen was quieter now after the bursts of laughter had faded. Only the steady ticking of the wall clock remained, mingling with the faint rustle of leaves outside in the night wind. On the table lay a few damp cleaning cloths carrying a trace of lemon that seemed to chase away the heaviness that had clung to the Prescott mansion for months. The children sat huddled close to Linda, cheeks flushed from laughing too hard, their hair tousled, but their eyes no longer shadowed as before. Lily clutched her worn teddy bear curled at Linda's side, resting against her, as if she had found a safe harbor. Then Tommy tilted his head, his gaze sharp, suspicious, yet burning with curiosity. "Who are you really? Why haven't you run away?" "Everyone runs away." Danny jumped in, his voice half teasing, half defiant. "Are you just here for my dad's money? That's why people come here." Linda lowered herself onto the wooden step by the window, the moonlight painting her face, tired but steady. She brushed a strand of hair from Lily's temple, hesitated, then spoke, her voice trembling slightly, though her eyes held firm. "Do you want to hear a truth? One most people are too afraid to say out loud." Bobby blinked, then nodded faintly. Danny bit back a smirk while Tommy clenched his fists, bracing himself for words that might make his chest ache heavier. Linda drew a deep breath, her hand tightening on the hem of her blouse. And then, in a voice almost a whisper, yet ringing through the silence of the kitchen, "I became a mother when I was 17. The words fell with the weight of breaking glass. All three children froze. Tommy's eyes flicked to his father. John, standing in the doorway, stiffened. The sharp, calculating stare of the CEO was gone, replaced with a flicker of raw disbelief. Linda bit her lip, but she didn't look away. She lifted her face to the moonlight, letting it blaze in her eyes like a silent vow she would not hide. A secret had just been opened. Not for sympathy, not for pity, but for this house to understand she was not simply a nanny. She was a woman who had stood at the fragile edge between love and loss when she was only 17. Her fingers turned the cheap ring on her thin hand as her voice dropped lower. 17. Most girls were wearing prom dresses, arguing over lipstick shades. But for me, 17 was the age of a night with no way home. The children's eyes clung to her. Bobby leaned to the side, waiting as though she were about to tell a fairy tale, but all he found in her smile was sorrow carved faintly at the corners of her mouth. That night, it rained. I sat on a cracked plastic chair outside the emergency room, my shoes soaked through, alone. Just the loudspeaker calling names and the stench of antiseptic filling the air. Her voice faltered, but she forced herself onward. The boy who promised to stay never came back. I held the ultrasound sheet, shaking so badly I couldn't read the words. 17 years old, and the world collapsed in a single night. No father to call, no mother, no friend willing to hold my hand. Danny pressed his lips together, the mischief drained from his eyes. Tommy's hands curled tighter, as if part of her pain had spilled into his own chest. Linda smiled faintly, a bitter curve of courage. They called me foolish. Said a 17-year-old girl knew nothing about being a mother. But when I felt that tiny heartbeat under my skin, I knew I couldn't turn away. So I stayed, alone, and I fought. John inhaled sharply, his hand going to the Rolex at his wrist. Almost without thinking, he unclasped it and set it down on the counter. He didn't know why, only that every word she spoke struck deep, pounding against the hollow places he carried too. And for the first time in the eyes of the children, Linda wasn't a stranger anymore. She was someone who had once stood in the storm they themselves knew too well, yet still chose to keep walking. Linda bent down, holding tightly to Lily's small hand, as if drawing strength from that tiny palm just to keep speaking. Her voice trembled, but her eyes were clear like a scar, long-healed, still tender when touched. The day the doctor placed Lily on my chest, they asked if I was certain I wanted to keep her. I was 17. No job, no family, no home. They said letting go would be easier. But when those little eyes opened for the first time, I knew I could never walk away. The kitchen was so still, you could hear the clock ticking. Tommy, usually hidden behind his armor of pride, suddenly looked at Lily, then back at Linda. His eyes quivered because her story mirrored his own pain of losing a mother one moment, one choice that changed everything. Linda's voice broke as she went on. I once stood in a grocery store aisle holding a carton of milk crying because the last coins in my wallet could only buy bread. I once carried Lily through a freezing park at night just so she could sleep because the room we rented had no heat left. There were nights. I didn't think we would make it. Bobby tilted his head, eyes wide, innocent, glowing. But you did. You kept Lily. Linda smiled faintly, pressing a kiss into her daughter's hair. Yes, because Lily was both my burden and my greatest gift. There were nights I cried until I was empty, but when she held my hand, I knew I had to live. From the shadows, John's chest tightened. This woman was not only brave, she possessed something his wealth, power, and empire had never bought him: an unyielding refusal to give up. A secret had now taken shape. Linda hadn't stepped into this chaotic kitchen merely as a nanny. She carried with her a history of loss and of a love that refused to surrender to fate. She fell, quiet eyes drifting toward the window, where moonlight spilled across the cold marble counter. Her voice softened like a confession she had never dared to release. There were nights I was afraid of myself, afraid I wasn't enough to be a mother. Times Lily cried through the dark hours, and all I could do was sit, hands clutching my head, thinking, I'm too young, too small. How can I survive this? A tear slipped from the corner of her eye, landing on her hand. Linda didn't wipe it away. For the first time, she allowed the 3 children and the man standing there to see her true fragility. I wanted to run once. There was a moment I stood on a balcony staring down at the dark street, thinking, maybe if I disappeared, Lily might be better off. But then, she smiled in her sleep, her tiny hand clutching my shirt. And in that moment, I knew if I disappeared, she would have no one. Oh. Tommy swallowed hard, his face tightening as though struck in the chest, because more than anyone, he knew the hollow ache of no one left. Danny turned his head away, rubbing his eyes quickly, pretending it was dust. Bobby hugged his teddy closer as though shielding the tender ache sparking in his little heart. John closed his eyes. As a CEO, he had stood before billion-dollar deals, watched lives shift with a signature. But never had words pierced him like this. The woman before him, with nothing but sheer will, had confessed something most powerful men would never dare admit: the fear of not being enough. Linda lifted her head, her voice still unsteady, yet her eyes shone bright. I didn't run. And because of that, today I am here with you. The Prescott kitchen, once filled only with shouts and shattering glass, was now silent. But it was not a heavy silence. It was charged with something deeper, an indescribable strength born from truth, raw and painful, yet profoundly redemptive. For a few heartbeats, time seemed frozen. The children stared at Linda no longer with defiance or suspicion, but with a weighted silence, each word she had spoken pressing into the tenderest places in their hearts. Tommy, the toughest of the 3, let out a fragile whisper. My mom. She didn't run either. Not until she couldn't stay anymore. His voice cracked, halting. Beside him, Danny's eyes were red, his lips pressed tight against the table's edge. He looked ready to argue, to shield himself with sharp words, but no words came. He only gripped the wood harder. Bobby couldn't hold back at all. He broke into sobs, the sound echoing in the vast kitchen, raw and unrestrained. Linda didn't speak. She simply opened her arms. At first, none of them moved. Then Bobby rushed forward, burying his face against her chest, crying like the little boy he still was beneath the anger. Danny sighed, trembling, then leaned his head against her shoulder. Only Tommy remained standing, torn between pride and pain, his gaze wavering. Linda looked directly at him, offering no pressure, only a soft smile. You know, sometimes the strongest thing you can do is allow yourself to cry. Her words cracked his last defense. Tommy's knees buckled. He pulled his brothers close, holding them tight as his own tears fell for the first time since losing his mother. And in that fragile circle of arms, Linda gathered all 3 boys against her. Her heart trembled not with fear, but with the startling realization that her own wounds had found their echo in these 3 shattered hearts. From the doorway, John's hand clutched the wooden frame, trembling. His chest ached, torn open. For years, his heart had been calloused by loss, hidden behind the mask of a ruthless CEO. But now in Linda, he saw more than a woman. He saw his reflection, a truth he had never dared to confess. He too was afraid. He too had wanted to run, but he had never been allowed. And in that moment, 4 souls, 1 woman who had once braved motherhood alone, and 3 children who had lost the only mother they knew, came together as something fragile, unspoken, yet unmistakable a family. No promises, no contracts, just tears mingling quietly into one. Do you believe that shared wounds can bring people closer together? Share your story below. Someone out there might need to hear it tonight. Part 6. The Wall Crumbles. The Prescott kitchen was no longer filled with shouts nor the bursts of laughter from earlier. Instead, a heavy silence settled in, thick as fog. The 3 children sat in a row on the white fur rug, eyes still swollen from rare tears. Across from them, Linda sat with Lily in one arm and Bobby's small hand clasped in the other. The chandelier's light no longer glittered with icy grandeur. It glowed instead with a fragile warmth, as if shielding the delicate conversation about to unfold. Tommy was the first to break the silence. Lifting his chin, trying to keep his hardened composure, his voice trembled as he spoke. We don't want to like anyone. We don't. Because everyone leaves in the end." Linda froze. It wasn't a child's tantrum she heard, but the sound of a wound being torn open again. Danny bit his lip, turning away, but tears still dripped onto his sleeve. Bobby leaned against his brother's shoulder, whispering faintly, "The other nannies? They all left. And Mom left too. We're tired. We don't want to love anyone anymore." Linda's heart clenched, strangled by their words. She remembered herself at 17 when she had believed the whole world would abandon her. The fear of being left behind it was far too familiar, far too cruel. She bent forward, her eyes shining with tenderness, yet fierce with resolve. "I will not leave. I promise. Not because of a job, not because of money, but because I know exactly how much that pain hurts. And I will never let another child feel it again." Tommy stared at her, suspicion tangled with yearning, as if he wanted to believe, but fear still bound his chest. Danny let out a broken sob. Bobby clutched tighter, whispering in a trembling voice, "You'll stay. Really?" Linda nodded, tears streaking down her cheeks. "Yes, I'll stay. For as long as you need me." In that moment, the first wall came down, not with cleverness, not with authority, but with a simple promise anchored in truth. Linda stayed there on the rug, arms wrapped protectively around Bobby, her eyes watching over Tommy and Danny. Their faces, usually so stubborn and sharp, now looked unbearably fragile, so fragile she feared even the smallest movement might shatter them. Tommy's fists clenched until the veins on his hands rose. He wasn't crying anymore, but his words fractured as they left him. "I hate when kids at school ask where my mom is. I lie. I say she's just away. But really, I want to scream that she's gone. I'm afraid if I say it out loud, they'll pity me. And I don't want that. Because pity never lasts. People always leave after pity." Danny lowered his head, his hair hiding his damp eyes. His voice broke as he whispered, "I hate the nights. I hate waking up and finding no one there. Once I opened my eyes and the room was empty. I thought Dad had left too. My chest hurt so bad. I've hated sleep ever since." Bobby still buried his face against Linda, his tiny hand clutching her shirt. His words came like a trembling thread. "I don't dare like anyone. Every time I start to care, they disappear. Like Mom, like the nannies, like maybe even you." Linda couldn't hold her tears back any longer, but she didn't hide them. Instead, she bent down and kissed each child's hair in turn. Each kiss was a vow carved into her heart she would not leave. From the doorway, John's fists tightened until his knuckles whitened. His children's confessions cut straight through him. All this time he had told himself they were just unruly, spoiled, in need of discipline. But here it was. The truth laid bare. Every tantrum, every act of defiance was only armor hiding their terror of being abandoned. For the first time, the walls of the Prescott mansion heard the true fears of its children. Not shouts, not destruction, but broken sobs, raw and heartbreaking, and in those tears the fortress around their hearts cracked once more. John remained at the threshold, his broad shoulders, once always squared and unyielding, now trembling. In the boardroom, he had made rivals bow their heads. Before the press, he was the unshakable CEO, unreadable cold. But now, watching his 3 children crumpled in the arms of a woman who had once been a stranger, he had never felt more stripped bare. He stepped forward slowly, each tap of his leather shoes echoing hollow against the marble floor. The children looked up at once, their faces tightening, as if bracing for scolding. Tommy stiffened, Danny shrank back, and Bobby clung desperately to Linda. That instinctive fear cut into John like a blade. Drawing in a long breath, he lowered himself onto the rug beside Linda, level with his children. It was something he had never done before, bend down to the same ground where their small, aching hearts lay. His voice was rough, unlike the sharp, commanding tone they knew. "You're right. I'm afraid too. Afraid of waking up to find this house empty. Afraid of the way your eyes blame me. Afraid that I'll fail at being your father." Tommy froze. Danny's head jerked up. Bobby's sobs stilled into silence. Never, not once, had the man they thought untouchable spoken the words, "I'm afraid." John turned toward Linda, his eyes glistening. "I built an empire, but I don't know how to keep this house warm. I lost your mother. And since then, I built walls of steel thinking I could protect you. But all I did was teach you to believe that everyone leaves." A tear slipped down his cheek, carving a line down the strong neck that had always held itself so high. The room was still. The triplets stared, disbelieving. Their father, the man of steel, the millionaire CEO, was breaking apart before their eyes. Linda laid a gentle hand on his shoulder, her voice no louder than a breath. "You're not alone." And in that moment, there were no CEOs, no nannies, no power, no fear, just 4 children, and a man learning how to be honest with his pain. And within that breaking for the first time, a true spark of hope flickered. The silence deepened until hearts could almost be heard beating. John sat hunched, his trembling hands on his knees, while his children stared at him, uncertain, searching. Since their mother's death, never once had they seen him kneel to their level. Never once had he shared the same ground, the same grief. Danny was the first to speak, his voice fragile, half angry, half broken. "If you're scared too, why didn't you say it? We thought it was only us." John lifted his head, his eyes red-rimmed. "Because I was afraid that if I admitted it, I wouldn't be your strength anymore. I forgot. A father doesn't need to be perfect. He just needs to stay." The words shattered the air. Bobby let go of Linda and hurled himself into his father's arms, wailing, "Don't go anywhere, Dad. You have to stay with us." Danny hesitated only a heartbeat before dropping to his knees, clutching his father's waist, his sobs spilling out tangled with Bobby's cries. Tommy, the hardest, the proudest, stood frozen for a moment more. But then his eyes locked with his father's, glistening with tears, and he broke too, falling forward into the embrace, his shoulders shaking. John's arms opened wide, wrapping around all 3 sons at once. For the first time since their mother's death, they felt the embrace of family. No cold dinners, no invisible walls, only warmth, tears, and hearts melting into one another. Linda stood nearby, her eyes shimmering. The steel walls of the Prescott mansion had finally crumbled, and in the ruins a real home was being built. That first embrace, the moment when 4 broken souls found each other in the dark. No promises of forever, no contracts, just a single embrace strong enough to blur the scars of the years. After that tearful embrace, the entire mansion seemed to change its color. No longer cold walls separating one soul from another, but a home beginning to breathe again after months of suffocating silence. John still clung to his children as if letting go would make everything vanish. The triplets sobbed until their chests ached, but these were not the cries of anger or rebellion. They were the tears of children who had finally found a safe place to rest. Linda knelt beside them, placing her hand gently on Danny's back. Her voice was soft, steady. "You don't have to be strong on your own anymore. From now on, whenever you're afraid, you can say it out loud. I, Lily, and your dad will all be here to listen." Danny tightened his grip on his father's shirt, whispering, "If I say it, will you still stay, Dad? You won't go away again?" John pulled him close, his voice hoarse yet firm. "No, I promise. I'll be here, no matter what." Tommy lifted his face, his cheeks streaked with tears. He searched his father's eyes, desperate to know if those words were true. John didn't look away. For the first time, the gaze of a billionaire CEO wasn't cold or untouchable. It was raw, human, filled with tenderness he no longer tried to hide. Bobby rubbed his eyes, then reached out his small hand to clasp Linda's. A simple gesture, yet one that carried the weight of a door opening at last. In that touch, Linda felt it. The children no longer saw her as someone who might leave. She was part of the circle now. Tears streamed down her face as she smiled, her heart trembling with relief. In that fragile moment, the truth was undeniable. The fortress walls around the Prescott mansion had finally crumbled. And from the ruins, something new was being built. Not a palace of marble and glass, but a family. For the first time since their mother's passing, the grand estate was filled not with wealth, not with power, but with warmth. With love, the only force strong enough to bring life back to broken hearts. If you were in the children's place, would you dare open your heart again after being abandoned? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your words might be the very light someone out there needs tonight. Part 7. The Rescue Squad. That morning, sunlight poured through the wide glass windows, painting honey-gold streaks across the marble floor. For the first time in a long while, the Prescott mansion felt at peace. The triplets no longer fought over who ate first. No spoons clattered or bowls went flying. They sat quietly while John found himself stealing glances at Linda, where she and Lily were giggling over a piece of toast burnt at the edges. Then suddenly, Lily leapt to her feet, her curls, bouncing eyes sparkling bright. "I have an idea." 3 pairs of eyes turned toward her, surprised. Even John raised a brow, though the tug at his lips betrayed his curiosity. Lily planted her hands on her hips, standing tall like a tiny general commanding an army. "We need a special team, a team that saves sad people, because everyone in this house is sad. So, we'll create the Rescue Squad." Tommy blinked. "Rescue Squad?" Danny gave a shy, uncertain smile, the first in a long while. "Sounds like superheroes," Bobby whispered softly, almost afraid to hope. "But how do we rescue?" Lily circled the table, then stopped, pressing her small hand against her chest. "By listening, by making people laugh, by staying close, so no one feels alone." The kitchen fell silent. Linda gazed at her daughter, pride swelling in her chest. She had never taught Lily fancy words like that. This was wisdom born from a child who had already known loss. John sat motionless, his CEO composure shaken. Each word from Lily felt like a pinprick, piercing the steel armor he had worn for years. In a mansion once drowning in sorrow, it was a 6-year-old girl who lit the spark of hope. Rescue Squad. It sounded like play, but it carried the weight of a promise to rebuild a broken family. That afternoon, the garden glowed in the golden wash of sunset. Birds chirped high in the old oak trees that had only known silence, but now beneath their shade 4 children huddled together, whispering as though planning a great mission. Tommy sketched a map into the dirt with a twig. "Okay, Lily's the commander. But what's our first mission?" Lily tilted her head, thought for a moment, then grinned. "Our first mission is to make Dad laugh." Danny let out a skeptical breath, but he's never really laughed, only those polite smiles. Bobby nodded, his voice hushed. "If Dad laughs, it means the Rescue Squad worked." The three boys looked at one another, then at Lily. In that instant, children once trapped behind walls of fear discovered a reason to step forward to bring joy to someone else. That night, while John sat in his study, papers spread before him, the door burst open. He froze at the sight: four children in makeshift costumes, bath towels as capes, pots as helmets, spoons in hand, like weapons of cheer. "Rescue squad, move out!" Lily shouted, her eyes glowing like fireworks. They launched into a self-made play, the story of a cold king taught to laugh by three mischievous soldiers and one tiny princess. Bobby played the king, frowning so comically that John chuckled despite himself. Tommy strutted as the stubborn soldier, Danny slouched as the lazy one, and Lily darted around, juggling an orange. Linda stood in the doorway, her hand over her mouth, trying to hold back tears. And then something no one expected happened. John laughed. Not the practiced smile for clients, not the stiff grin for headlines. A true laugh, deep, unrestrained, echoing through the study. A laugh that broke open the house like a window flung wide to spring air. The triplets froze stunned, then their own laughter bubbled up, spilling into the room. Like sparks catching flame, joy spread until the whole house shook with it. For the first time in years, John's laughter, real, raw, alive, rose alongside the giggles of his children. And in that moment, the rescue squad proved its strength. Not through power, not through money, but through the simple, radiant truth: love can bring any heart back to life. After that little play filled with laughter, no one was ready to drift apart. Instead of running off to cartoons or fighting over video games, the four children pulled each other into the living room, settling into a circle on the thick rug. Firelight flickered from the hearth, washing their faces in a warm amber glow. Linda and John sat quietly behind them, not stepping in, not walking away. They simply watched, as if bearing witness to a small miracle unfolding before their eyes. Lily spoke first, her voice solemn, her presence surprisingly steady, like a tiny commander leading her squad. The rescue squad doesn't just save other people. We have to save ourselves too. Each of us will share a secret, something that makes us saddest. We'll keep it safe, and together, we'll find a way to make it lighter. Danny lowered his gaze, lips pressed tight. For a long moment, the room held its breath. Then he exhaled shakily. "I'm scared of sleeping alone. Every night I think Mom will come back, but when I open my eyes, there's no one there. So I pretend to be strong." Silence thickened around them. Bobby, usually mischievous, reached for his brother's hand and squeezed. Tommy's hard stare wavered, cracks showing in the stone wall of his eyes. Bobby swallowed, his voice fragile. "I hate Christmas. Everyone looks so happy. But all I see is Mom's empty chair. I don't want to decorate the tree anymore. It just reminds me." Linda pressed a hand to her chest, her heart aching. She longed to gather them into her arms, but she knew in this moment they needed each other more. Then it was Tommy's turn. The boy who always carried his pride like armor, his voice was rough, unsteady. "I'm scared that if I start to like Linda or like Lily, then one day they'll leave just like Mom. So I pretend to hate them, pretend to push them away. But the truth is, I don't want them to go." The words landed like a gentle knife, cutting deep. Linda bit her lip so hard it drew blood to keep herself from sobbing aloud. John's fists tightened on his knees, his fingers trembling. Finally, Lily lifted her clear, luminous eyes. "My secret is, I'm scared of losing my mom too. But I've learned one thing: if you love someone, you have to say it. Because maybe tomorrow, you won't get the chance." Her gaze moved from John to the triplets, a bridge invisible yet undeniable stretching between them, a child's heart reaching toward others scarred by loss. And in that little circle, their secrets no longer weighed them down. Instead, they became threads weaving sorrow into something else, a rope strong enough to pull them closer, turning pain into a bridge where love could finally cross. The room grew quiet after the children laid bare their secrets. The fire snapped and crackled, throwing its red glow across every face in the circle. Linda touched Lily's shoulder gently, a silent praise for her daughter's courage. But now all eyes turned toward John. Danny asked in a timid whisper, "Dad, do you have a secret too?" John froze. A CEO who lived at the summit of power, his world measured in numbers, contracts, and control, was now being questioned by three small faces full of expectation. For a heartbeat, he thought of dodging. But then Tommy cut in. Rescue squad doesn't skip anyone. If you're sad, you have to say it too. Bobby nodded eagerly, his eyes shining. John leaned back, rubbing his forehead. He had never imagined saying it out loud, but that little circle, those pleading eyes, stripped him of every title. He was no tycoon here, no mogul. Just a man. Just a father who had lost his way. I do have a secret. John's voice was low, his gaze fixed on the flames. I'm most afraid of failure. Not in business, but in being a father. When your mom passed, I didn't know what to do except drown myself in work. Every time I saw you cry, I felt powerless. So I avoided it. I thought hiding would hurt less. But all it did was push you farther away. The silence was thick. The triplets said nothing, but their eyes softened. Danny crawled closer, laying a hand on his father's knee. Dad, you didn't fail. You're still here. Tommy stared hard and unblinking, then spoke quickly, as if afraid of changing his mind. If you really want to start over, then Rescue Squad will let you join. Bobby sniffled, wiping his wet cheeks, then grinned. But you have to promise to do your missions properly. Linda turned away, but her tears slipped free. For the first time, she was witnessing John Prescott, the man who once made Wall Street tremble, bow his head before three small children and speak of fear. It wasn't defeat. It was the lesson of the Rescue Squad. Only by admitting your pain can you ever be healed. The firelight danced across their faces, brightening both their sorrow and the fragile hope now binding them together. The four children pressed close, Lily clutching her worn teddy bear like a banner raised for their new team. Tommy, usually sharp-tongued, spoke with quiet resolve. If there's a rescue squad, then there has to be an oath. Danny tilted his head, eyes shimmering. What kind of oath? Tommy glanced at Bobby, then at Lily. Finally, his gaze turned to John and Linda. We promise never to leave each other again, no matter what. The air tightened, heavy with meaning. Danny whispered, his voice trembling. If anyone's sad, we'll carry it together. Make it lighter. Bobby lifted his small hand, still damp with tears. If anyone's afraid, we'll hold their hand, day or night. Linda covered her mouth, overwhelmed. She knew sometimes a child's oath was stronger than any $1,000,000 contract John had ever signed. Lily stood proudly like a little general. Then repeat after me. Rescue Squad never leaves anyone behind. Rescue Squad never leaves anyone behind. The children's voices rang out, echoing into the high ceiling. John was silent. Then something no one expected. He bent forward, laying his large hand over the pile of tiny ones. His voice was low, raw, weighted like a prayer, I swear to. Linda froze. In the flicker of the fire, she saw it, the change in him. No longer the cold CEO, no longer the man encased in steel, but a father finding his way back to his heart. When John's hand covered theirs, it was more than the oath of a rescue squad. It was a vow of rebirth for a family once broken, now bound anew. If you were part of the rescue squad, what would your oath be? Share it in the comments. Your words might be the very promise someone else needs tonight. Part 8. The Social Crisis. The morning sun slipped through the white curtains of the Prescott mansion, promising a peaceful day. But before peace could settle, a storm arrived at the front door. The butler entered, arms weighed down by a fresh stack of newspapers, the ink still sharp. Across the front page of the New York Times Daily blazed a headline in bold: billionaire CEO Prescott leaves his children in the hands of an unknown single mother. The photo beneath it showed Linda, snapped without her knowing, carrying Lily in the park. Her hair was tied in a quick, messy knot, her shoes worn, her arms clinging protectively around her child. Right beside it, another photo of John, immaculate in his Armani suit, polished and untouchable. The contrast was brutal, designed to sting a dynasty's future entrusted to a woman with no degree, no pedigree, no place in their world. Other papers were no kinder Nanny or gold digger Linda Carter, the mysterious past of the Prescott children's caretaker. John flipped each page, anger flaring, helplessness boiling beneath it. He knew the media too well. Once they caught the scent of difference, they would turn it into a spectacle for the world to devour. At the breakfast table, Linda sat, frozen fingers trembling around a cup of coffee. She didn't lift her head. She could feel the whispers from the staff, the glances of quiet judgment. Then Tommy stormed in, clutching his tablet, his voice sharp with fury. "They called you a fraud. They said you're only here for Dad's money." Linda's breath hitched, her eyes stinging. Danny's lips quivered as he asked, "Are they going to take you away?" For a moment, Linda couldn't speak. She only gathered the three of them into her arms, trying to hide the tears threatening to spill. Once she had been abandoned by the world. Now the world was trying to strip her bare again. But this time she wasn't standing alone. Three small hearts clung to her, trembling. That afternoon the house grew heavy. The laughter that had filled it days before seemed to vanish. Then the doorbell rang, long, sharp, unrelenting. Through the glass, Linda's chest tightened. Two CPS officers stood there, gray suits, thick folders in hand, their faces set like stone. They introduced themselves in clipped tones. "We've received a complaint regarding the safety of the Prescott children. We need to evaluate the living conditions, and in particular, the role of the current caregiver." Linda faltered, her lips parting, but John's voice cut in, firm, unshaken. "Check whatever you need. But I will tell you this. My children have never been safer or more loved than they are right now." One officer opened the folder, eyes glancing over Linda with a cold detachment. "According to our file, Ms. Carter has no formal child care certification, no documented professional experience. Furthermore, we've been informed she has a child of her own, also residing here. That could create complications." The words felt like a blade peeling away Linda's last shield. Her lungs burned as she drew a breath, ready to speak, when Tommy suddenly stepped forward, his voice clear and unwavering. "Linda isn't just a nanny. She's our home." Danny quickly added, his eyes wet. "Without her, we wouldn't be eating together. We wouldn't be laughing. Dad wouldn't be hugging us again." Bobby's hand tightened around Lily's, his voice trembling yet firm. "If you take her away, then you'll have to take us too." The room fell into stunned silence. The CPS officers glanced at each other, visibly unsettled. They had expected defiance, perhaps, but not this, not loyalty. Not from children whose reputations had long been etched as wild and unreachable. Behind them, Linda stood rooted, her throat locked tight. She didn't need to defend herself anymore. The triplets had done it for her. In that moment, under the weight of society's doubt, three once broken children stood tall. They no longer hid, no longer ran. They declared in voices steady and raw that the woman accused of being unworthy was the one who had given them back their home. Love, they proved, isn't written in records or sealed in contracts. It lives in trust, in laughter, and in the fragile yet unshakable promises of children. The elegant living room might as well have been an interrogation chamber. Priceless paintings on the walls, Italian leather chairs polished to a gleam, none of it softened the suffocating air. Linda sat stiffly in one of those chairs, her fingers laced so tightly her knuckles turned white. Every so often her eyes flicked toward the triplets huddled together on the sofa opposite her, three small warriors, ready to defend her at any cost. The CPS officer flipped open the file again, his voice cold and clinical. "Ms. Carter, is it true? You became pregnant at 17 and were abandoned." The question fell like a stone into water. The room went silent. Linda felt John's gaze on her, not judging, not doubting, but waiting. Her nostrils flared with a steady breath. Then she nodded. "Yes, I made the mistake of loving someone unworthy. He left when he found out I was expecting. But in that moment, I understood I had to live. Not just for myself, but for the child inside me." The officer scribbled notes, his voice even sharper. "You have no formal childcare certification, no stable career history. Why should we believe you can care for the children of a billionaire household?" Linda's pulse hammered. Her body trembled. But then her eyes landed on the three faces across from her. Danny clutching Bobby's hand tight. Tommy's hard stare, burning with a silent strength meant only for her. She swallowed her tears and spoke slowly, firmly. I don't have a degree, but I carry something no certificate can teach: loss and the strength to rise after it. Because I once lost everything, I will never let a child feel abandoned again. I can't promise perfection, but I promise I will stay. The room seemed to hold its breath. And then the triplets broke from the sofa. They rushed to Linda's side, dropping to their knees to wrap their arms around her. Tommy lifted his chin, his voice ringing. Linda stayed. And we choose her. Her painful confession hadn't broken her. It had become her strength, the power of a woman standing bare in the gaze of judgment, declaring only one truth: I will not leave. The mansion was heavy with silence, the kind that could shatter with a single breath. The CPS officers hadn't even finished writing when John suddenly rose to his feet. The leather chair scraped back, its sound echoing like the start of battle. He stepped forward, tall, commanding, his spine straight, his gaze sharp, every inch the powerful CEO. But this time, what stunned them wasn't his presence as a billionaire. It was the conviction in his voice. I've allowed the media to say whatever they wanted. I've grown used to being picked apart. But I will not allow a rigid system to touch my children or the woman who gave them back their laughter. He faced the two officers, his voice low and unyielding. Ms. Carter is not just a nanny. She is the reason my children sleep peacefully at night. If you need to inspect anyone, inspect me. Because I chose her, and I will stand with her against the press, against society, against anyone. His words thundered through the room, striking like lightning against the cold wall of regulations. Linda's breath caught her lips, trembling. She had never seen John, armored, untouchable John, bare his heart so openly. The triplets looked up at their father, eyes shining. Danny whispered, voice breaking, "Dad, you finally see it." One officer cleared his throat, his tone less severe now. "Mr. Prescott, your statement will be noted, but we require proof from the children themselves." Tommy stepped forward at once, his small shoulders squared. He stood before them, his voice firm. "We are the proof." And for the first time, a billionaire who had lived by silence and control tore off his mask. He stood not as a CEO, but as a father, and as a man willing to protect the woman his heart already recognized as family. The next morning, the heavy iron gates of the Prescott estate no longer felt private. Dozens of reporters swarmed outside, microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing in a relentless storm. Tabloids screamed their headlines in bold, accusing fonts. Billionaire CEO hires single mother nanny, a risk to his heirs. John was about to step out and face them when a clear, steady voice rose behind him. Tommy, just 9 years old, carrying himself with the weight of someone far older, gripped Danny's hand and pulled Bobby along. Together, the triplets stepped onto the front steps. Their small frames, their unwavering eyes silenced the crowd more effectively than any command. Tommy lifted his chin, his voice ringing out strong as any grown man's. "You want to know what we think of Linda? Then listen. Without her, this house is nothing but 4 cold walls. She taught us how to laugh, how to sit down and eat together, how to believe tomorrow could be better." Danny stepped forward, his voice trembling but brave. "The papers can write whatever they want, but the truth is, we need Linda more than anyone else in the world." And then Bobby, usually the shyest, stepped up. A reporter instinctively lowered a microphone to him, and with both hands, he held it tight. "She isn't just a nanny, she's our family. If anyone tries to take her away, then you'll have to take us too." The air went still. The clatter of cameras stopped. The shouted questions died on lips. Those childlike words, innocent yet razor-sharp, sliced through every prejudice. Even hardened journalists found themselves lowering their heads. From the doorway, Linda pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Tears spilled freely, not from fear this time, but from overwhelming pride. John stood watching, his chest swelling with a rare, powerful feeling, pride that cut deep, and a love so fierce he could no longer contain it. When the world turned against them, 3 fragile hearts had stepped forward like warriors, lifting their voices to shield the woman who had healed them. A family doesn't always need certificates or approval. Sometimes all it needs is the courage to stand together in the storm. If it were you, Would you stand up and defend the one you love before the whole world? Share your thoughts in the comments, and let us know what you feel about the courage of these 3 children. Part 9. A True Family Moment. The Grand Prescott kitchen had never been so alive. Once a place where only the clink of silver cutlery against porcelain echoed now, it was filled with the scent of flour, melted chocolate, and laughter ringing off marble walls. On the long counter, flour spread like snow, and the triplets' small hands worked clumsily yet eagerly at the dough. John, usually immaculate in his white dress shirt and silk tie, now had his sleeves rolled up, his tie tossed aside. He leaned over Danny, steadying the boy's hand as he tried to spread frosting that had smeared off the cake's edge. Next to them, Bobby licked chocolate from his fingers only to be scolded by Linda. "No sneaking bites before the candles, young man." He scrunched his nose but nodded obediently. Tommy, the boldest, was carefully placing tiny candles onto the cake, a cake imperfect in form, yet rich with love. Their flickering reflections danced in the children's eyes. Linda stood a little apart, her heart trembling as she took it all in. She had never imagined that one day within this mansion of marble and chandeliers, she would hear such simple, tender sounds, shouts, giggles, and the music of belonging. John looked around at the chaos, and his lips curved into something rare, unforced. He was a man accustomed to 5-star birthday galas toasting with investors beneath chandeliers. Yet now, as the children cried out, "Dad, make a wish," he realized that never in all his years of wealth and power had he been given a moment so precious. As the first candle was lit, John no longer felt like the CEO of a billion-dollar empire. He was only a father sitting before the clumsy cake his family had made. And that smile, unpolished, unguarded, was the truest gift of all. The moment the candles were blown out, applause and cheers erupted. Danny showered chocolate sprinkles over the counter. Bobby smeared frosting onto Tommy's cheek, and Tommy shouted in protest, "Hey, not the face." Laughter spilled everywhere, bouncing off the marble that had once known only silence. Linda pressed play on a small speaker, filling the kitchen with a lively tune, a playful mix of country and jazz. Without realizing it, the children began to sway, dancing around the flour-dusted floor. John leaned back, watching with quiet awe. He hadn't seen his children this free, this unguarded, since their mother had passed. Their laughter, once rare as a luxury, now rose easily, filling the air. And he knew Linda and little Lily had turned this heavy mansion into a home. Linda caught John's gaze across the chaos. For a moment, everything stilled, as if the music itself paused. He rose, crossing the kitchen, and offered his hand. His voice was low, a little awkward. "If we're going to have a party like no other, shouldn't we have a dance too?" Color flushed Linda's cheeks. She glanced at his hand, strong and steady, then slipped hers into his. The music wrapped around them as they began to turn slowly, not with polished steps, but with the simplicity of 2 souls meeting halfway. Danny shouted, "Careful, Dad, don't step on her toes." The children burst into laughter again, but Linda felt her heartbeat sinking with John's steady rhythm. A simple dance. Yet it erased the distance between 2 worlds, a billionaire CEO and a single mother. When John's arm slipped gently around her waist, pulling her close amidst the flour and frosting, it wasn't just a dance. It was the moment his wandering heart finally found its way home. When the dance in the kitchen ended, the laughter slowly faded. On the marble counter, the cake covered in cream and chocolate, imperfect, yet overflowing with love, still had a few small candles left unlit. Lily, the little girl with sparkling eyes, tugged at Linda's sleeve and whispered, "Mommy, I want Daddy John to have one more wish." Linda froze for a second, her heart tightening at the innocent sincerity of those words. She nodded gently. Lily bravely stepped forward, taking a match from the box on the shelf, her small hands trembling as she struck it. The blue flame flickered, reflecting on her face like a tiny angel bringing a miracle. John watched in silence, his heartbeat skipping. This little girl, not of his blood, yet carrying such earnestness in her gaze, left him unsettled. As Lily placed another candle on the cake, she looked up, her clear voice echoing through the kitchen. "I wish Daddy John will never feel lonely again, because now you have us, and you have my mommy too." The air turned still. The triplets' eyes widened. Linda clasped a hand over her mouth, and John, the man accustomed to shallow birthday toasts and billion-dollar contracts, suddenly felt his eyes burn. He leaned down, placing his large hand on Lily's small shoulder, his voice rough. "Thank you, Lily. That wish I'll hold on to forever." The triplets clapped wildly, their cheers breaking the silence. Daddy has another daughter now. Linda's heart swelled with joy and fear all at once. But when John looked up, his eyes lingered on hers, deep and gentle, as if to say he was ready for something greater than contracts or wealth, a real family. A single candle, a child's wish, had erased every boundary of blood, fortune, and status. At that moment, John understood family is not something you're born into. It's something you choose to love and protect. When the last candles burned down, the kitchen was far from quiet. The triplets had no intention of letting the party end properly like the CEO Gallus John was used to. Danny grabbed a ladle and drummed on a pot like a war cry. Bobby waved a napkin like a pirate's flag while Tommy lined up wooden chairs to form a ship. Dad is the captain, Linda is the cook, and Lily is the kidnapped princess. Tommy shouted, commanding the crew. Linda laughed, shaking her head. "And what about me, Tommy? You're our ally. But don't forget to bake more sweets for the crew." While everyone threw themselves into their roles, John sat back watching the scene unfold, part amused, part overwhelmed. Never had he imagined this mansion, once so cold and empty, could become a stage for children's laughter. The image of heavy contracts, tense meetings, and thousand-page deals simply melted away. Danny suddenly tied a napkin around John's neck, yelling, "Captain John, to the deck." In that moment, New York's sternest CEO had no choice but to play along. He chuckled, his eyes glowing with tenderness. Linda instinctively covered her mouth because she had never seen him this human. No longer the cold billionaire CEO, but just a father playing with his kids. The game of pirates raged for over an hour, cream and chocolate everywhere, laughter and music echoing through the entire floor. Finally, the crew collapsed onto the kitchen rug, breathless but smiling. John sat in the middle, shirt-stained, hair tousled, but his eyes brighter than at any press conference. He murmured under his breath, almost to himself, This is the real birthday party." Amidst the laughter, John let go of his armor as an untouchable CEO. And when his eyes met Linda's across the chaos, they both knew this wasn't just a children's party. This was the beginning of a home. When the pirate game ended, the kids lay sprawled on the rug, giggling and out of breath. Linda knelt down, wiping cream from Danny, Bobby, and Tommy's faces, while Lily leaned against her chest, eyelids heavy with sleep, but glowing with joy. John slowly walked over, bending to pick up a fallen spoon. It was a small gesture, yet the look he gave Linda was full of gratitude and warmth. Suddenly, Bobby shot up, throwing his arms around Linda from behind. "Miss Linda, don't ever leave. I want you to stay forever." The words struck her heart like a wave. She wrapped her arms around him, tears pricking her eyes. Danny and Tommy dove in too, forming a tight embrace around her. Lily wriggled into the circle, giggling. "This is the Sadness Rescue Squad, remember. Now we hug so the joy doesn't run away." The kitchen froze in that moment. John stood watching, seeing 4 children clinging to the woman who had stormed into his life like chaos, but brought light with her. His shoulders trembled, then, unable to resist, he knelt down and wrapped his arms around all of them, Linda and the kids together. It was no longer the embrace of a powerful CEO, but of a man reclaiming his family. Linda lifted her head, meeting his eyes up close. Amid the tears and laughter, she realized the loneliness that haunted them all was finally being filled. That embrace, messy, tearful, bursting with laughter, was the moment they became a true family. Not perfect, but warm. Not flawless, but real. If you've watched this far, put yourself in Linda's shoes, a single mother embraced for the first time in what feels like a true family hug. Do you think she should open her heart to this happiness, or keep her distance to protect herself? Leave a comment, and don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Part 10. The Unexpected Proposal. That night, the Prescott Mansion's garden glowed with an extraordinary beauty. Along the gravel path, strings of golden lights swayed gently in the night breeze like fallen stars caught in midair. The scent of lavender and white roses mingled in the air, softening the night with warmth and poetry. Linda stood quietly beneath the veranda, a thin shawl still in her hands. She had never seen the garden lit this way. Usually it was cold and silent, as lifeless as the heart of the mansion and of the man who lived inside it. But tonight, everything was different. John stepped out dressed in his flawless black suit as always, yet his eyes had changed. No longer sharp and impenetrable, but tender-laced with the nerves of a man not standing in a boardroom, but at the threshold of the most important decision of his life. Linda. His voice was low, resonant in the stillness. She looked up, eyes wide with surprise, a mix of hesitation and disbelief. He moved closer, the golden lights washing over his face, illuminating the sincerity etched in every line. I used to believe the only things I needed were power, the next massive deal, control over everything. But then you came, you and Lily, and I realized this house, this heart, has been cold for far too long. A shiver ran through her. From a billionaire CEO once known for ruthless detachment, the words sounded so gentle they made her want to cry. John hesitated, then suddenly raised his hand. From behind his back, the light caught on a small velvet box, navy blue, holding a simple yet exquisite diamond ring. Linda, will you make this place a true home with me? The air tightened. Linda stumbled back a step, her heartbeat chaotic. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, when behind her a small trembling voice chimed in. Mommy, Daddy John is asking you. It was Lily. The ring sparkled under the golden glow, but it wasn't as dazzling as the earnestness in John's eyes. The wall Linda had built around her heart began to crack. Then, to everyone's shock, John turned, kneeling down in front of Lily. The grass dampened his expensive suit, but he didn't care. His gaze, meeting the little girl's at eye level, was filled with a gentleness she had never known. Lily, he said softly, his deep voice trembling with emotion, I don't just want Linda to stay. I want you to stay too. Not as a guest, not only as your mother's daughter, but as my daughter. Lily's eyes widened. No one had ever said words like that to her. Since birth, she had only had Linda and a void where a father should have been. Her small lips trembled. You really want to be my dad? John swallowed hard, his eyes glistening in the night. Not just want, I need to. I promise I will never leave. I will protect you. I will love you as if you were my very own blood. The words fell slow, but heavy with devotion. Linda's tears spilled freely now, her hand flying to her mouth. She could not believe that this man, once nothing but cold ambition, could speak such simple, sacred vows. Lily stepped forward, wrapping her tiny arms around John's neck, her voice breaking. Then, from now on, I'll call you Daddy. John pulled her into his chest, shutting his eyes, letting his own tears fall into her soft hair. In that moment, John was no longer a distant CEO. He was a father reclaiming the missing piece of his heart. And Linda, watching overwhelmed, knew this was not just about love anymore. It was about family. The night breeze stirred the rose branches, spreading their sweet fragrance across the garden. Linda stood frozen, her hands trembling, as she clutched her shawl, while before her, John still knelt, holding Lily tightly, as if letting go would mean losing everything. The golden lights bathed his face, revealing every line, no longer cold, no longer distant with power, but raw, wounded, and yearning. It was the face of a man desperate to be loved, not as a billionaire CEO, but as a flawed, vulnerable human being. Linda stepped forward, her heart pounding, memories flooding back, 17 years old, abandoned, carrying a child alone, mocked and shamed. She had sworn never again to let a man close enough to hurt her. Yet now, watching John kneel before Lily, she knew her walls were no longer whole. John turned, his eyes glimmering with fragile hope. He still held the velvet box, hand trembling as he extended it toward her. Linda, let me be your man and Lily's father. I can't promise a perfect world, but I promise I will never leave. Linda bit her lip, tears slipping down her cheeks. She sank to her knees before him, laying her trembling hand over the tiny box. Her voice shook, but her words were resolute. I once thought I could never trust again. But tonight you proved that family isn't just a distant dream. Yes, John, I will. For a heartbeat silence. Then cheers erupted from the children. Danny shouted at the top of his lungs, "Yes, Daddy did it." John laughed through tears, his eyes blazing with joy. With unsteady hands yet unwavering resolve, he slid the ring onto Linda's finger. And in that instant, the garden seemed to burst with light, not fireworks, but a gentle radiance spreading everywhere, as if blessing this new beginning. Her yes was not just an answer to a proposal. It was the closing of a past scarred by loss and the opening of a chapter where a broken heart dared to trust again. The moon hung full and bright, a silent witness to the sacred moment. The children's laughter rang through the garden, then softened, leaving space for Linda and John. He still held her hand, eyes never leaving her tear-stained face. She whispered, "John, do you know how terrified I've been? I lost all faith. I thought my heart only had enough strength to protect Lily." John shook his head, stepping closer, squeezing her hand gently, as if to pour strength into her. "I know, Linda. I saw it in your eyes the very first time we met, but you don't have to carry it all alone anymore. From now on, whenever you're weak, whenever you want to fall apart, I'll be there to carry it with you." Her tears flowed again, but this time they were tears of release. She had never heard a man speak with such truth. No grand promises, no empty words, but a vow, straight from the depths of his soul. John lifted his gaze to the glowing moon, then back into her eyes. "I swear I'll love you not because I need a woman to fill this house, but because I can't live without you. I swear I'll love Lily, Danny, Bobby, and Tommy as my own children. No yours or mine, only ours." Linda broke down, but now her sobs were threaded with joy. She gripped his hand tighter, nodding through trembling lips. "Then I swear, too, I'll never leave. No matter what the world outside says about us, I choose to stand by you." From afar, the children stood still, eyes shining. Danny whispered softly, "Maybe we just got our family back." The vows exchanged between Linda and John were not witnessed by thousands, not captured by cameras or dressed in glittering luxury, yet they shone brighter than any triumph John had ever known in the boardroom. The night wind softened, leaving only the scent of roses and damp grass lingering in the air. Linda and John still held each other's hands, their eyes glistening with tears, yet burning with newfound faith. In that hushed moment, Lily suddenly darted forward, her small arms wrapping tightly around Linda's waist and reaching across to John as well. "Mommy, Daddy, we really are a family now, aren't we?" Her voice trembled, fragile, yet filled with hope. Danny, Bobby, and Tommy exchanged glances. For only a heartbeat hesitation lingered, then they too rushed forward. Danny flung his arms around John's shoulders, Bobby clung to Linda, and even Tommy, the most cautious, inched closer before finally slipping into the circle, hugging them both. In that crowded, imperfect, but fiercely warm embrace, there were no strangers left. The small hearts once scarred by loneliness were soothed, held by John's steady strength and Linda's unconditional warmth. John drew all 5 of them close to his chest, his voice breaking as he whispered, "Yes, from now on we are a family. No one has to be afraid of being left behind anymore." Linda leaned her head against his shoulder, overwhelmed. She had once believed the dream of a home was nothing more than a distant illusion. Yet here, under the golden lights, beneath the watchful moon, and within the tangled embrace of children's arms, she realized that dream had finally become real. Laughter mingled with tears bursting free like a melody too long silenced. A family once fractured had found its missing piece. No palaces, no lavish banquets, just one complete embrace was enough to fill their world with joy. In that moment, the broken hearts of Linda, John, and the children alike found their shelter. One embrace, one family, one promise, and the beginning of something entirely new. The House of Hearts. 3 years later, the garden in front of the Prescott estate no longer stood in silence. Bursts of blossoms bloomed in every corner while children's laughter carried through the wide blue sky. A new oakwood sign painted a pure white bore the words, Hardhome's Center, a place where hearts can stay. John, once a cold CEO who only knew contracts and boardrooms, now wore a simple apron as he bent down to tie the shoelaces of a little orphan boy who had just arrived. The same hands that had signed millions of deals now moved gently like a father's smoothing hair and straightening collars. Gone was the sharp gaze of pressure and power. In its place was the calm of a man who had found something far more valuable than wealth a home. Linda sat on the porch, her laptop resting on her knees as her fingers danced across the keys. Her new book, Stay, The Story of a Family, was slowly taking shape. Beside her, Lily read aloud clumsily like a tiny editor in training, her bright eyes sparkling with pride. Danny, Bobby, and Tommy kicked a ball under the golden afternoon sun, occasionally sprinting back to hug Linda, as if afraid this happiness might slip away like a dream. From pain they had built a home. From loss they had learned to stay. And from a love once fragile they had made a lighthouse to guide the children still out there, little souls searching for a real family. John placed a hand on Linda's shoulder, his voice steady and warm. Family isn't just blood. Family is the people who choose to stay no matter the storm. Linda smiled through tears. Across the garden, the children's laughter rose like a living song, mingling with the crimson sunset. In that moment, the truth was clear. True love was never about grand promises or glittering banquets. It was simply about staying, holding on to each other when the world outside was raging with storms. Family is not just blood, it's choosing to stay. Do you believe true love is about staying, not leaving? Share your thoughts below. And don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Want to hear more journeys of love and healing? Hit subscribe and ring the bell so you won't miss the next one.